All right, folks, welcome to this week's CPS community chat here. Glad to see people filtering in, some familiar faces and perhaps some new ones as well. Glad you're enjoying the mood music. I actually have to say I stole that idea. I yesterday did a live event, office hours, with my friend Dr. Bruce Perry. And it was great. He had some tunes playing to begin rather than just sitting there awkwardly while people filtered in. So I decided, hey, let's pick some CPS themed music. We are going to be talking about skills today. And I don't know if anybody noticed, but In My Feelings, Emotion Regulation song by Drake. But I figured I shouldn't play any explicit lyrics here, so I went for the Kids Bop version. Tess, nice to see you. Wow, from Virginia. Great to connect with some old friends here. So let's get started. And if you're newly joining us here, we like to sort of pick a general topic to give us some context. And I'll just introduce that a little bit and then open it up for some questions and discussion. So please actively use the chat window. Dr. Alicia Pilastri is monitoring it along with me, so she can help sort of make sure that your questions don't go unanswered to the best of my ability here. So I know in these chats we've been talking a lot about the relevance of collaborative problem solving. Because this is a time that is demanding great skills from everybody. I've been spending a lot of time telling people that, look, if you're not somebody who has really exhibited much challenging behavior at all, historically, it's probably because you have the skills to handle what the world's throwing at you. Right now, though, the world is throwing a lot more at us, and particularly things that are requiring skills in the areas that we're used to working in, because kids and others who struggle with those skills tend to struggle managing their behavior. And I think we're seeing that more than ever right now for kids who struggle with those skills, but we're seeing it for all of us. So I'll just cover a little bit of this. And for folks who are familiar with collaborative problem solving, we often talk about 5 different areas of skill, sort of skill domains, that one has got to be pretty good at if they're going to manage what the world is throwing at them effectively. And I think there are a few right now that are in high demand. And of course, the obvious one is what we call cognitive flexibility. Our ability as humans to be flexible, to adapt to change, to shift from one way of being, one mindset to another, to take situational factors into account that suggest that even though we might want to do something a certain way, we might have had a plan way, it's going to look very different right now. I can't think of a time in my lifetime now, so 50 years on this earth, that has demanded more flexibility than the current time. So that's a skill domain that's really needed right now. The other is what we call emotion and self-regulation. And I'll try to translate anytime we use jargon. When we say regulation, all we really mean is one's ability to control or manage. So emotion regulation is your ability to manage yourself. Emotion regulation is your ability to manage your emotions, whereas self-regulation is your ability to manage yourself. And these are in huge demand right now as well. Folks having to manage really strong emotions, everything from disappointment to anxiety to frustration to overwhelming sadness, fear. All of those are emotions that we've got to regulate to be able to manage them successfully. And on the self-regulation front, we're also having to do all kinds of things in our day, and our kids are having to do all kinds of things that involve shifting their arousal level to go from being attentive in school, online school, remote school, to actually freeing up and engaging with people around the house, to then going back into focused engagement in a way that is much harder to do without the supports of school in place. So those are a few of the areas that I think are being taxed right now, our skill domains. But just to round it out, there's 3 more areas we talk about. One is language and communication skills. And think about it right now, it's so hard for many of us to just even know sort of how we think about what's going on, how we feel about what's going on from one day to the next. I know one day I'll be saying to myself, you know what, my family right now is safe and healthy. I have a job. I'm feeling okay. And then the next day I'll be totally out of sorts and not really have an idea why. So knowing what's going on with ourselves and communicating in a time like this, very hard. Now, again, some kids struggle with language and communication skills when all is good in the world. Another category, attention and working memory skills. Again, some kids struggle to filter out distractions, stay focused, shift their attention when people ask them to, follow multi-step directions, stay organized, to adhere to expectations and routines. Well, if that was hard to begin with, my goodness, is it hard now? And then the final category, social thinking skills. Actually, even though we're all pretty much locked in our homes, our apartments, places like that, we're actually needing to use all kinds of social skills, social thinking skills that may not have been in as high demand previously. And to give you an example, one is knowing how our actions and behaviors impact other people, and knowing how sort of we come across, and how how our behaviors ultimately are influencing those around us. And when you're in tight quarters with others that you're not accustomed to, when you've got expectations you're trying to meet alongside of each other, it's really important for you to know how you come across, know how people perceive you, know how you're impacting others. And all of those skills are skills that some kids and some adults struggle with, again, when regular life is in front of them. So what I've just tried to do quickly is sketch out these 5 skill domains: flexibility, emotion and self-regulation, language and communication skills, attention and working memory skills, and social thinking skills, all of which we need to behave ourselves well in the world under normal circumstances. But right now, we need them more than ever. So you may be noticing with yourself, with your loved ones, with your kids, the kids you work with, the kids you teach, the kids you treat, that they may be struggling more than ever with some of those skills. And it's not surprising, because there's nothing like stress to make it harder to access whatever skills we had in the first place. So with that as context, let me pause, and I would love to get a sense of what people right now are seeing, what they're experiencing, what they're hearing, whether it's in their homes, in their virtual classrooms, when it comes to the demand for these skills, where people are struggling, so we can try to help. Because of course, a big question is, if somebody's struggling with some of these skills, what can you do to help bolster those skills and support them? Just catching up on the chat window here. So feel free, folks, to type in a question, a comment you might have that we can shed some more light on here. And I see a lot of comments about particular resources that Dr. Plastry is answering here. I would say also watch social media closely. I know Think Kids, but also I have personally been trying to tweet out whatever resources we have, little video clips, recording of the conversation that we had with Dr. Bruce Perry and his community yesterday, all kinds of things that I think could be helpful during this time. Yes, Chrissy, exactly. So parents are frightened to let their kids outside, and by and large, we shouldn't be doing much of it except under certain circumstances, but then the kids become stir crazy and can't manage their emotions. And what you have there, what I think Chrissy is describing, is parents scared, right? Us scared. I've got 3 of my own. And so we're trying to manage our own emotional response to this anxiety. But then at the same time, as we try to keep our kids inside, and they're getting stir crazy and can't manage their emotions, what you get is 2 dysregulated, or more than 2 dysregulated people, all in tight quarters. And one of the things we often say is that dysregulation is contagious. So it sort of bounces off one another. Now, here's the thing. that example, us being scared to let our kids outside, being told that they shouldn't be going outside, and our kids getting stir crazy, or, which is happening with a lot of teens these days, sneaking out and going places and with people that they're not supposed to in the era of social distancing. What do you do about that? Well, we'd call that a problem to be solved. And the best way to handle that is to actually do collaborative problem solving, to sit down with your kids proactively and to acknowledge that they're going crazy inside, but not to just assume that we know what their experience is like, and instead to ask a bunch of questions. We often use the mantra of be curious, not furious. Ask a ton of questions as to, okay, well, what is this like for them? What is the most challenging part for them? And then be careful not to just respond by saying, well, unfortunately, you can't go outside right now. No. Stick with your concern, not your solution. Okay. So your concern really, I think, is going to be that right now it's not safe for yourselves and others to be in close proximity to others. So then can start the brainstorming. And, I think there are lots of great examples of what families are doing and others to try to get outside and do something, but not necessarily be close to others to the degree that it would be problematic. But as I've been trying to focus on a lot in these last few weeks, I've been encouraging everybody to make sure to be collaborative. Don't come up with some brilliant solutions for what your kids are going to do outside that feels safe, because they might not want to do it. So make sure they're co-authors. Okay, you've got tough problems to solve here. Get as many problem solvers as you can in on the action. Make it a problem that you're solving together through collaboration. They'll be much more engaged as a result. So thank you, Chrissy. Scroll down here a little bit. Emotionally fragile, seemingly small things, or things previously managed, send them into a tailspin right now. Carly, yes. This is the thing that we were just talking yesterday on the webinar with Dr. Perry. He helps people understand that all of our skills, like skills handling little things that are frustrating, right? We would call that an emotion regulation skill. They're all state and context dependent. What that means is they're dependent on the context we're in and the resulting brain state. And you know what? Right now, this context that we're in, this pandemic, has us in a different brain state a lot of the time. Now, it's fluid, right? But in a state of anxiety or panic, the fact that you were able to regulate your emotions a month ago pretty well when small things happen is sort of out the window, because in this current context and state, you don't have full access to those skills. A great question by Rob here, who asks something on the minds of lots of parents and teachers. How do you strike a balance between structure and flexibility when navigating homeschool and remote work from home? It's beautifully stated, Rob, because everybody's hearing so much out there about how important structure is, and keep your structure and set a routine and things like that. And it is. It absolutely is. And yet there's got to be room for flexibility, because we don't know what the best structure should look like. And I can tell you, even my own kids, I've got one college, one high school, one middle school. Both the high school and the middle school in the last week have completely changed their schedules and how they're teaching, because in a couple of weeks of doing it, they've realized there's all kinds of problems. For instance, they're trying to keep people, doing a Zoom class for an hour and 15 minutes. It's just way too long. And you can't approximate a regular day like that. So we're all having to learn from setting structures and having them not work so great. But I guess what I would suggest is it gets back to this idea of collaboration. Let your kids know that the structure is really important. You want them to be co-author of it, and it's not going to work great. There are going to be problems with it. So let's create something together, and let's see how it works. And when it doesn't work so great, let's come back and see if we can tweak it. I think it's crucial for parents to not put themselves in the full-on position of homeschooling teachers. It's just, you know what? We don't know how to do it. Teaching is hard enough for teachers who are incredibly trained to do it. It's hard enough. So first and foremost, focus on connection and support. And obviously, you want to be thinking about how can you nudge your kids to meet the expectations that the school is setting. but I wouldn't take that on entirely. You know what? Plan C is going to be useful here. People know collaborative problem solving, know that what I mean by that is some dropping of your expectations, okay? Not shelving them entirely, but be very judicious about it during this time. Karen, young children need their support with remote learning while parents are also trying to work and facing lots of resistance. Exactly. Well, this is exactly what I mean. And, you know, I hate to say it, but sometimes the parents' work is going to take precedence right here while parents are trying to keep their jobs. And is it bad for kids to be sacrificing several weeks of learning? It's not great, but it's not the end of the world either. Which is why if you have to trend in one direction, I trend in the direction of not coming down heavy on the homeschooling. Now, with young kids, they may be excited to do it, but as Karen's pointing out, they just need support to be able to do it. Believe it or not, even with kindergartners, I'd suggest enlisting them in collaboration so that you can structure times where you'll be available, but also where they're co-author of knowing that there are times that you're not going to be able to provide that kind of support. Vicki, nice to see you again. Self-regulation lacking on your part and your son. Yes. Well, and that's really interesting. You know, Vicki's illustrating how it takes two to tango, saying that her son's behaviors, things he uses to regulate himself, actually are triggers and, you know, trigger her and send her through the roof. And that's really important observations for us parents to make, which is, okay, what does trigger us? And do we need to make some accommodations? Because not knowing enough about it, you know, we might say, Vicki might say, it's actually good that he's able to do these kinds of things. It just drives me crazy. And so there may be some adjustments that need to be made so that it's not going to drive you as crazy, but they still have access to things that are self-regulating. Okay. Again, though, no reason for us adults to be the genius here and have to figure it all out. Let's do it together with the kids. Yeah, and Tess, you know, who works in, at least when we work together in pretty tough clinical settings, is talking about cognitive distortions, which is like professional jargon for biases in thinking, distorted thinking, like what we used to call stinking thinking. And she's saying, you know, when it's pretty crappy right now, if you're an all or none thinker, you have a hard time thinking what I'm trying to tell myself all the time, which is, you know, like I will go to a restaurant again. And I will be able to go out and be close to my friends and talk to them from more than, you know, from less than 6 feet away. Like, that's going to happen. It's hard right now, but it's going to happen. If you think in a very black and white way, though, you take the information that says this is really crappy right now and extend it to it's always going to be crappy. And then you get to places in the more severe cases like it's not even worth living right now. I would just remind everybody that, you know, when somebody says something like that, our immediate response, which comes from an empathic place, is wanting to say just what I said, which is, it's going to get better. Don't worry, hang in there. But oftentimes when somebody's really mired in a distortion, that doesn't come across as empathic. So use what we know about collaborative problem solving here, which is start with empathy. And I'll remind people, empathy doesn't mean you have to agree with the distortion or disagree with it. You can just let somebody know you heard it. So in other words, if somebody's saying to you, life is just not worth living, it's so unfun right now, and I should just die, what you want to say is, wow, so it sounds like things are feeling so bad for you right now that you just don't even see the use in going forward. And it sounds like you're feeling pretty pessimistic about the future right now. Fill me in. I want to hear more. And don't be scared of hearing more of that. And if you spend a good deal of time hearing that kid out, it's more likely that they're going to pause and hear you then saying, I'm not trying to minimize what you're telling me. I want to point out that I do think there's some cause for optimism in places. And again, I'm not talking you out of it, but I just want to paint a little bit of a different perspective too, and see if you think there's any reason that that's useful to think about as well. So it's sort of gently throwing gray at a very black and white interpretation. Let me scroll down here. Yeah, and Trisha's making a good observation. that a dysregulated adult is incapable of regulating a child. I mean, no dysregulated person can regulate somebody else. The good news is, while I said dysregulation is contagious, regulation is also contagious. So if we can manage to stay regulated, we have a better chance of regulating the kids around us as well. And Kim is noting here, SEL in remote learning communities like Zoom. Can you elaborate on some approaches teachers can lead with in order to provide a productive and safe and learning environment? Yeah, Kim, this is a massive topic, and maybe honestly should be a topic for a whole session here. But I think the easiest thing to sort of focus on these days when you're trying to teach a classroom using Zoom is to get right down to the curriculum. I actually think it needs to be even more tilted in the other direction. Probably not going to surprise you. That you need to work on fostering connection and support first and foremost. And so I think whatever academic subject you're trying to teach, you need to start with the kinds of things that, and I don't know what ages you teach, but if you could be teaching high school, and you need to start with the kinds of things that we think about in a kindergarten classroom that emphasizes a social emotional curriculum. And that is things like morning meeting. That is things like going around and sharing what's going on for each person. It's those kinds of things that are going to be absolutely critical to have people engaged to make the academics even feel worthwhile. And I can tell you from my own work with kids and families and teachers right now, not doing that feels ingenuine too. It's like it's the elephant in the room. It's what's going on in people's lives, which is why I think we need to emphasize that first and foremost. And we'll think about whether we maybe want to focus a whole session for educators on this new reality and how one can foster the kinds of things we're talking about through Zoom, for instance. Okay, so Kimberly, whose son has executive functioning challenges, is having a really hard time remembering what's due in his 7 classes. It's a lot of classes, and making sure he's handing work on time. He's a 504, checking in with him to make sure he knows to do his homework. He's in a combination, but I'm wondering how schools can carry that out, carry that over right now to home settings. I'm wondering if it's even reasonable for me to expect schools to do that right now, because I feel like they're doing what they can right now. So well said, Kimberly. Our philosophy with collaborative problem solving applied to kids is kids do well if they can. Well, guess what? Parents do well if they can. Educators do well if they can. I don't think it's actually reasonable necessarily to expect educators to be able to do that. In this current environment, they're just trying to fashion the most effective ways to engage and teach their kids, as we were just talking about. So I think to the degree that we can, it's incumbent upon us parents to try to help to provide some more of that support. Again, we want to be careful that we're not coming across as trying to impose it upon our kids, because that's just going to create friction as well. So you want to try to start it from an empathic place and see whether this is, that support is welcome from a kid as well who's having a hard time remembering what's due, because there's probably ways that you can help if they're open to it. We are planning a virtual tier 2, by the way, as well. And that's actually the links registration is going to come out for that real soon. Tier 2 is our most advanced multiple day training. Dates are coming out for that in May, very soon. So we're excited about that. And right after that will be a virtual tier 1 as well. So what do we let go or not, Angela? My son's on screens too much, but screen time is causing dysregulation. Yeah, well, I've said this before. It's really tough to argue that screen time is problematic when we're also asking kids to be using their screens to pursue their schooling. But the best you can do with this, Angela, is you can try to have proactive conversations with your son about whether there's some way to manage the amount of time, whether they think it makes sense to consider, some limits to it that would be co-created and not imposed upon them. I don't think that parents should be getting into big fights right now over screen time. And I realize what that means for many of you all out there is way too much screen time for our kids. But in moments when they're not on the screens, see if you can just engage them in proactive conversation about other things we might do at different times. So that might decrease that screen time a little bit. But I just don't think we want to, as I mentioned, be getting into great conflict over it at this point. This is why in our lingo we say plan C, dropping things strategically for now is more important than ever. Margaret, thanks for chiming in here as well. Margaret's one of our wonderful staff members from Oregon. Homeschool, Claire is saying a difference between a homeschool teacher and a crisis teacher. Right. Yes, it's incredibly difficult for teachers as well on this. And this is completely uncharted territory here, which is why perhaps the most important thing we have to have right now is tremendous empathy for each other. Nobody's in an easy situation right now. Kim's using weekly check-ins with kids individually, helping them put weekly schedules together with them that they can use. Also adapting work expectations on what the students want to do, what they enjoy. You know, it's funny. I'm always hoping that out of crisis comes some real growing. And I think right now we're being forced to think about the most engaging things for kids, which is great because things that kids are the most engaged in are the things they feel most motivated intrinsically for. And I'm hopeful that we actually may come out of this highlighting those things more than perhaps ever before. All right, some other great examples people are sharing here as well. Right, Jill is saying there seems to be a lot of online work coming, but what her daughter feels thirsty for is real connection. And I know that our teachers are working the hardest they can to try to figure out ways to make that happen. Absolutely. Let me take one more question here. Pauline says that she owns a childcare nursery. Kids under 5, they're trying to stay connected using video, story time, connection bags, but some parents are already worried about the transition back to nursery after a long time of separation. I don't blame them. I am too. You know, so many kids struggle with that separation. And when it's interrupted like this, and I think we need to be clear, interrupted during a time of great concern. And we sometimes pretend that, you know, a 5-year-old doesn't know what's going on and we try to shield them from it. They know, because even if they don't know the facts, they feel the fear and the dysregulation from us adults. So they know. So, you know, I'm not surprised that people are worrying about that transition because it may be difficult, particularly for the young kids who struggle the most with their emotion regulation skills. And we may need to be thinking much more aggressively about how we do that. So in other words, to give you an example, we may be thinking about the child at your nursery school has struggled the most with separation from their parent. And every trick you've pulled out when they have returned, those are things we may need to institute class-wide for all kids. Now, I guess the other thing just to leave people with is I'm talking a lot about collaboration with kids. Let's not forget collaboration from teachers to parents and parents to teachers. We're all in this together. And ultimately, with things like that, transitioning back to nursery school, that's going to have to be support on both ends working together to be able to pull it off effectively. I know that we are coming up against the time here. I'm glad to see some other folks who are chiming in as well, so we can try to keep as many tabs on this as possible. Before we wrap up, I want to give a little heads up. Next week, my colleague and good friend, Dr. Bruce Perry, who's a world's expert in childhood trauma and the effects of trauma on the brain and functioning, he'll be joining us for this time. So you'll all benefit from hearing some from him and how he thinks about our work, particularly in this time as well. So we'll be sending out information on that, but it's a special treat to have him join us next week. So I hope that I'll see you all and many others next time as well. Thank you all for joining us. Please be in touch with us. Let us know what you want to hear and see, what we should focus on in future sessions. We're really trying to be there to provide support in the ways that are most helpful to folks. So we want to hear from you. Please, please be in touch. be safe, stay healthy, and remember the most important thing, I'll reiterate again, the philosophy behind this approach. People do well if they can. We are all doing the best we can to handle a very difficult situation with whatever skills we can manage in the moment. So be kind to each other. Regulation is also contagious. So let's do our best. Thanks so much for joining us, folks. Bye-bye now.